Looking ahead, challenges and opportunities in the changing world. Welcome to Talking Economics, a podcast by the Center for Economic Research and Graduate Education, Economics Institute. In this episode, we are joined by Ctirad Slavík, an associate professor with tenure at CERGE-EI, to talk about taxation, the organization of knowledge and production, and the economic impact of policy reforms. We'll also learn about Ctirad's role as the leader of the Economic Impact Working Group in the City Research Initiative and one of his key analyses, the evaluation of the Czech income tax reform of 2021 and its impact on the economy. Welcome, Ctirad.
Thank you.
Ctirad, I would like to start with your research, with your theoretical research, where you devote quite a substantial amount, or you focus quite a bit on the optimal taxation of capital. So I would like to ask, what is the current state of knowledge in this sphere?
So I think most generally what we know from the literature is that the optimal taxation of capital in general is going to depend on what kind of other instruments the government has at its disposal. So most generally, if the government can tax each and every individual based on their innate skills or abilities, then they would like to do that. And what the result would be is that they would like to tax the more lucky ones, those that are more productive, and they would like to give money to those that were less lucky, let's say, in terms of their innate abilities. Now, that's typically not allowed in tax codes. So tax codes do not allow the government to discriminate based on gender, race, education, and so on. So that means that if the government wants to help the poor, they need to resort to indirect measures, such as taxation of capital. Because as we know, richer people, the more productive ones, they typically have more capital. So if the government wants to redistribute from the rich to the poor, one way to do it is to tax capital.
Mm-hmm. Your research differentiates from the existing or previous literature also in the aspect that you use or you work with the endogenous wages. Can you say why?
The idea that we have been pushing with my co-authors is that wages in general are going to be endogenous in the economy. So the wages of each and every individual are going to depend on his or her labor supply, the labor supply of people of a similar type, as well as labor supplies of people of other types. And wages are also going to depend on the amount of the other inputs, such as capital. What we are saying is, if you are going to be taxing anything, that's going to change the wage structure. And the government should take this into account.
Why have other people not done it before?
So there is papers that have been working with wages that are endogenous. There's models in which there is human capital accumulation that affects wages. But it has been relatively scarce, let's say. Standard optimal tax exercises are typically done in an environment in which wages are exogenous. And by taxing people, the government is affecting their labor supplies, but not the relative wages between different people.
So you say that the exogenous approach actually has some merit.
Sure. It is going to capture some important margins, such as the adjustment of labor supply, but it's not going to capture the general equilibrium effects that arise from changes in the economy that are going to happen because the government changed its tax policy.
So working with the endogenous wages, tell us more about your models and the answer to the question is, should we tax robots and machines?
So the first paper that we wrote with my co-author Haki Yazıcı on taxation of different types of capital was sort of moving in the direction of making the point that different types of capital have different elasticity of substitution with different labor types. So in plain English, what that means is that if there is more capital of certain types, this is going to affect the productivity of different workers differently. Even more plainly, in that paper that came out in 2014 in JME, what we are saying is, or what we are using is an assumption that there's two types of capital. One type of capital you can think of as buildings or structures, and that capital is neutral. So if you increase or decrease the amount of capital in the economy, that is not going to affect the relative wages between skilled and unskilled people, which are the two types of workers that we consider in that paper. On the other hand, there is other types of capital that we call equipments in that paper, and you can think of equipments as computers, machines, robots even. And there's wide empirical evidence that if you change the amount of this type of capital, say computers, so if you increase the amount of computers in the economy or in a company, if you like, that's going to increase the productivity of everybody, but it's going to benefit more guys or workers that have higher skills. So if you are taxing computers, or if you're subsidizing computers, let's say, you're going to help the economy, but you're going to disproportionately help the skilled people, who are typically richer, so that's not necessarily something that the government would want to do.
So you're dealing with a standard trade-off of equality and efficiency, right?
Right. That's correct, and that's very general in public finance. Typically, what happens is that the government, when they consider different types of policies, they're gonna face this trade-off. So if you're gonna, I don't know, let's say if you're gonna subsidize robots, you're gonna increase the productivity, or if you're gonna decrease taxes on robots, let's say, towards zero, you're gonna increase the output of the economy. You're gonna increase the productivity of various workers, but you're also going to indirectly redistribute from the poor to the rich because you're helping them more. So that's sort of the trade-off. So what we are pointing out in that paper is that you actually would want to tax, let's say, robots or equipments at a higher rate than capital, than the other type of capital, than structures, because you also want to redistribute from the rich to the poor. So in that paper, we make the point that the government actually wants to move, if you want to think about it that way, towards equality, a little bit away from efficiency.
Is there not a solution which will bring the ideal win-win situation when there is no trade-off with...
So this is something that I was saying at the beginning. Sure, if you are allowed to tax people based on their innate abilities, then you would want to do that because that's not distortionary. But that's typically not allowed. Let's say in the U.S. Constitution, for instance, says quite explicitly what you cannot do. On the other hand, we have another paper that was analyzing the reform proposal of the Obama administration back in the day, and what they were saying is that we should tax different types of capital at the same rates. So what turns out to be true in many tax codes is that governments are subsidizing high-tech capital, let's say computers. And the Obama administration noted this in a more general way, that different types of capital are taxed at different rates. And they thought it was not fair, and they were kind of proposing, let's eliminate this and let's tax all the capital types at the same rates. What that would imply essentially is, first of all, it would eliminate this disproportionate treatment of different types of capital. So it would move towards efficiency, because in general, you want to tax, the different types of capital at the same rates for efficiency reasons. But it would also help equality, because by reducing taxes on neutral capital structures, as I mentioned earlier, and by increasing a little bit taxes on machines, equipments, robots, you would actually redistribute from the rich, from the more productive ones, to the less productive, the less lucky ones. So in that particular example, in that particular paper, the situation seemed to be favorable in the sense that you would be able to improve both efficiency and equality.
Mm-hmm. We talk a lot about inequality, which is a key topic, and it has risen quite a bit in recent decades. So do you see an explanation in your models for these increases in inequality? Is it linked to the increases in the technology?
So one motivation for our research was the 2000 Econometrica paper by Crusel, Ohani, and Rios, Rula, and Violante, where they exactly went in this direction. So what they did is they looked at a number of different time series, and they tried to estimate a production function that would make it that had the feature that one type of capital was neutral, structures, the other type of capital, equipments, was not neutral. And they were estimating the elasticity of substitution between these types of capital and different types of labor. And what they estimated is that indeed what we see, or what is going on, is that equipment capital is more complementary with more productive people, with skilled people. That's the first point. The second point is that what we also see, and we can discuss where that comes from, so that's not something that I have much to say about. The price of these types of capital, of computers, has been going down over time relative to the price of the other types of capital. So what that means in this world is that the price of equipment goes down. So as a result, firms are going to start using more and more of this capital, and that is going to increase wages of the skilled guys more than wages of the unskilled guys. And in their empirical paper, they are arguing that with this relatively simple framework, we can explain one particular direction in which inequality has evolved, namely that the college premium, which we define as the average wage of people with a college degree relative to the average wage of people without the college degree, has increased substantially in the United States. In their empirical work, they document that this college premium was about 50% in the 60s and went up to 90% in the 2000s. So that's a massive increase in college premium that we can essentially explain by a particular production function and a decline in the price of a particular type of capital, namely equipments.
Perfect, thank you. We talked about, and your research, you do a lot of research regarding the taxation of capital, but on the other side, we're talking about people, and for people, labor income taxation is the key thing, and this, you already started with that, it's a major tool of how to work with the public finance. Can you say something about the labor income taxation and what is the interaction of the tax progression here and the impact on the organization of knowledge and production?
So we have a paper with my colleague here at CERGE-EI, Marek Kapečka, where we the assumption that is similar to my other papers is that wages are endogenous in that paper, but there's no capital and the model is static. What happens in that model is that people interact in the production in the sense that they share knowledge. The way to think about that is that there are some people that have knowledge and they explain what they know to other people, and by doing that, they enhance their productivity as well. What we are doing in that paper is we want to quantify or compute the optimal tax progressivity in that framework. And by increasing tax progressivity, you're gonna get the usual effect that you're gonna be redistributing from the rich to the poor. But what you're also gonna do is you're gonna discourage labor supply of the more productive people, which is going to discourage them in some sense to transfer their knowledge to the less knowledgeable people. And that effect turns out is gonna be quite strong in the sense that we find that in that particular model, the optimal tax progressivity is relatively low, much lower than what it is in the United States these days, and massively lower than what it would be if wages were purely exogenous. And we believe that this is an important channel, and it's very important to know that this channel is quantitatively important.
So can you repeat once again, if the tax progressivity will decrease, and your results suggest that it should, what will be the impact on the inequality?
So the way we can think about it is the following, maybe. So think about that model in some sense could be thought of as a model of professors and students. So professors, they explain some stuff to the students. By doing that, they increase their productivity, and the students, end up being more productive at the end of the day. Now, if you make the tax code more progressive, meaning you tax professors at higher rates, you're going to discourage their labor supply. They're going to want to work less, right? Because they get smaller amount of money per hour worked. But now if they work less, they're going to explain less stuff to the students. So the students end up with less knowledge than if taxes were less progressive. And as a result, by increasing tax progressivity, it looks like you're helping the students, the less knowledgeable agents, but you're also hurting them because they're going to end up with less knowledge. So going back to your question at the beginning, higher tax progressivity here massively hurts efficiency, even though it could still improve equality.
Can you speak more about the equality and how does it impact the differences in wages on the top among the top skilled people and the lower tail?
If you end up taxing more productive people at high rates, you're going to decrease their labor supply. As a result, in the model at least, they're gonna form, let's say, one of the results that we would get is that they're gonna form smaller teams. They're gonna advise fewer workers, students in the example I was giving. As a result, the wages of these top income individuals are gonna get closer to each other because they are now sort of more similar in some sense. If you tax them at lower rates, the more productive, the more knowledgeable agents are going to be able to take better advantage of their superior knowledge. So by taxing income more progressively, you are kind of moving towards more equality at the top of the income distribution.
And the same as at the bottom, right?
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. That's actually not happening because what's going to happen at the bottom of the distribution when we talk about pre-tax wages, pre-tax incomes, is that when labor taxes become more progressive, these wages are going to become actually less equal. And the result is that in the model, what's going to happen is that these students or less knowledgeable agents are now going to be matched with more diverse instructors, let's say. And as a result, people that are matched with good bosses, let's say, they're going to be fine. But there's going to be some people that are going to be now matched with worse bosses, professors, supervisors, let's say, and they're gonna lose. And that's going to make the wage schedule at the bottom more steep, let's say.
Interesting. We talked about a lot about your research and models, theoretical research. But you also do apply your theories to practical questions. And we're in the Czech Republic, so I would be interested in learning more about your role in the research initiative CERGE-EI. First, can you tell us something about this initiative before we dive into the details?
So this CERGE-EI initiative, so CERGE stands for Systemic Risk, so that's supposed to be Systemic Risk Institute, and that is a big research group that consists of researchers from Charles University, the Academy of Sciences, and the Masaryk University in Brno. All people that are involved in this initiative are, most people are social scientists. The group, the research group consists of 9 groups, ranging from people that are interested in education, political issues, sociologists, and there's 2 economic groups. One is led by myself, and the other one is led by Mariola Pitlíková, my colleague here at CERGE-EI. So our group is interested in one particular topic that we study is the economic implications of the COVID pandemics. Mariola's group is more in more detail or in more specifically interested in the impacts that the COVID pandemics had on the labor markets.
Mm-hmm. Super, thank you. One of the things that you did within the CERGE-EI project is the analysis of the evaluation of the impact of the changes of the Czech income tax reform that happened in 2021. So what are the outcomes? Okay, first say what the reform was so that we know what we're talking about.
So this tax reform that was approved in 2020 and entered into effect on January 1st, 2021, decreased taxes for a wide range of people, It also increased the threshold for or the amount that you can deduct, and it slightly increased taxes at the very top. Now,
what was the motivation for that?
That's a good question. I don't know. We should go and ask the politicians. I think the idea was that you want to support the economy, even though it was pretty clear from the onset that this was going to be expensive in terms of the budget implications. The idea was that after the COVID pandemics or during the COVID pandemics, we need to stimulate the economy through these fiscal measures. So now what we do in that project is we are taking a pretty standard macroeconomic model, and we want to assess or estimate not only the short-run implications but also the long-run implications, taking into account some of the effects that we talked about here. That, first of all, wages are going to be endogenous in this model. So if the amount of capital changes, or if the amount of labor of one type changes or of the other type changes, that's going to have implications for wages of different types of workers, as well as for the return of to capital and so on.
There were no changes in the capital taxation at the time, right? So it was only relative that.
So as far as I know, the answer is no, but we are definitely not considering that in this project.
Mm-hmm. And what are the outcomes? Do you already have the results?
So we have some results where we compare what we call the initial steady state, so where the economy was in 2020, and the terminal steady state. So that's the idea here, is that we allow the model to kind of transform from the original situation, then we apply the tax changes, and we kind of, compute where the economy is going to eventually end up. And so what we are finding is that the implications are going to be somewhat less bad than what the static estimates would have estimated in terms of the budget implications. So that's one result. The idea is that in the long run, if you decrease taxes, people are going to end up working slightly more, and what that is going to imply is that the tax revenue drop is not going to be as severe as we would have guessed. So that's the first result. The implications are going to be less bad than we would think if we just apply some static estimates. The second result, though, is it depends quite a bit how you're going to finance this drop in government revenue. Because in the long run, of course, what we assume is that the government cannot keep running deficits until government debt is infinity. So it needs to converge to some number. So in our benchmark, what we are assuming is that the government is going to finance this decline in taxes by reducing transfers.
Okay.
So that has this interesting implication that people are going to end up working more. If you give them less money, they will necessarily need to find other sources of finances, so they're going to end up working more.
Do you have specific transfers in mind, or?
So in the model, we somehow need to close the government budget somehow. So whatever is left over in the government budget gets distributed to each and everybody in a lump sum fashion. So that's what we call transfers. So that money is in the model is gonna be important for the poor agents, but somewhat less important for the rich agents because it's a smaller part of their income. But it's gonna affect the poor agents, and if you decrease their transfers, they're gonna end up working more, which is gonna have this positive effect on government revenue, as I was describing. If you decide to finance this decline in taxes through other sources, eliminating this somewhat, non-standard channel, then the implications are going to be worse, and they're going to be quite similar, in fact, to the static estimates that are available in the literature.
So the intention for the tax reform was to boost the economy. Did it work or did it not?
Well, we see that what happened is that because of this fiscal stimulus that was at the end not temporary, but was kept in place for a while, that was probably, there were like two reasons for the inflation spike that we saw. One was the energy crisis associated with the war in Ukraine. The other one were these fiscal measures where the government was essentially handing money to agents, to some extent overheating the economy. So we have probably, I don't have numbers that I could give you to what extent it contributed to the recovery. It probably did, but for sure it contributed to the inflation hike that we saw as well.
And in terms of timing, it was done through the COVID crisis to address the crisis, but then the war in Ukraine happened.
So that's a bit hard for me to say based on the research that I have done. One thing that we could probably, so I'm gonna change gears a little bit. So I'm not gonna answer your question, sorry. But one thing that we could do perhaps would be to now look at what happened in these last 3-4 years and see to what extent the model that we have, whether it could replicate some of the things that have been happening in these last few years. So originally I was describing the basic exercise which compared the initial situation with one to which the economy is going to converge in the end. Currently, we already have codes that make it possible for us to compute what the transition path between the initial and the final steady state is. So we could take a look at to what extent the things that the model predicts are in line with what actually happened in these last 3 or 4 years. We haven't done that yet, but that's on the agenda.
And in the model, you can introduce all these sorts of shocks.
No, or it's gonna be hard to think formally about the war in Ukraine. One reason being that we don't really have different types of goods in the model. What we have is we have capital and we have general output. So we don't model energy and energy prices in that particular model.
Thank you for a very comprehensive overview of the topic, both theoretical and practical, and I'm looking forward to your future results.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot for having me.